Okay, you guys, this is the overlay method for the grass, or basically getting your grass diffuse color to be provided by the satellite overhead image, or any image. But basically, in the end, it's how we're going to take these meshes into Blender and basically get the satellite overlay to color them. Unfortunately, there's a few different things we're going to run through here, so it's going to take a bit of time. One thing that we're going to also correct at the same time is if you're getting the triangles around the bunkers, it's really just a product of how Coarse Forge works and how the shader works. Because the shader plants grass based on vertex density. You know, in an area like this, you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 vertices. It's uniform throughout. It's going to look good. Up here around the bunker, you've got, whatever, 6 to 8 vertices to make a curve. And then you're just going to have a larger density of points in that area. And so it plants more grass. We're going to correct this using a program called Quadremesher. It fixes some things, but it doesn't fix everything. But I think it makes things look more uniform. It will struggle a little bit in areas that have a greater curvature. So one thing I would suggest, and this is what I'm doing on my Oakmont, is you can actually create a detail layer of rough and put that surround around the bunker, and then it will then create more triangles in this area, and then when we take it into Blender, it will do a better job at creating the mesh, so that you'll have a good approximation of this curve. Quadremesher will not exactly follow the old mesh, and so you'll have some areas where you have sort of greater curvature like this here, where you won't see some of the grass because the modified mesh for the grass is now underneath there. So anyway, let's get to doing some of the work. One of the first things I want to show you is my layers library settings. This is the bunker settings. Just give you a little time to digest that, or write some things down, pause, write things down. Here's my rough settings. I do not do a blend on my rough, and that's simply just because of looks. The blend is not seen because the grass obscures it, so we don't need it. In the old methods where we don't have 3D grass, I use blends because it just looks better. Here you don't need it, and there's a small advantage to not having it. When we go into Blender, it's one less step. You'll see the semi-rough and the fairway do have blends. Of note on these, modifications from the default. I've upped the grid fill on the semi-rough. I did that because I wasn't taking things into Blender. Ultimately, this doesn't really matter because we're going to quad remesh it. However, I would follow my settings only because then you could just duplicate what I do in Blender and the numbers will all work out to be the same. You don't have to. I mean, this isn't the one way to do it. You can certainly find your own way, but this is to get a result like I had in Scioto if you happen to like that. Then this is the fairway settings. I think the only thing is this is probably 2 in the default, the grid fill, and I've just changed it to be the same as the rough at the 1.5. Okay, and then let me also show you, I guess, my outer rough spline. I think if you've watched the other videos on the overlay method, that would be important. Go watch those first and then come back here. I do change the way I do things, but at least you have some of the basics on how to export things and how we're doing this overlay method where the outer splines encompasses the whole course. But let me just show you the settings on my outer rough spline, and that's called rough low here. My grid fill is 5 on that. Now, of note with the outer spline that goes around my entire course, one thing that you'll want to do with this method is, or really any of these 3D grass methods, is try to lessen the distance between, and I could have done a better job and made these closer, but between your rough splines, you're going to want to move these as close as you can. Remember, we don't have a blend on the rough, so you could almost touch these, or at least put them close enough that these control points touch. And the reason that is because then you're going to lessen how many triangles are involved in this outer spline. And the smaller it is, then the less subdivisions you'll have to make on the mesh when bringing it back in. The other thing is, I don't really want that grass to be that visible. So if you zoom in here and you look between them, you can see there is a difference, and most people won't notice it, but there is a difference in grass density, and it's hard to get it to match just right because of the way Quadremesher works. And so the smaller this is, the less noticeable it's going to be. So in the end, you can kind of see that now that I've shown it to you, but in normal course of play, most people aren't going to notice that. But you're going to have, in this case, I've got a material on the left here, that's my rough, um, and then my outer rough material here, and then this rough on the right. So you really got three meshes coming in here and contributing to the grass. And then obviously the what I've actually done here, I'll show you later, but I'm using the same rough settings here, and so it just, I'm hoping that that lessens the number of materials and maybe is less intensive, um, you know, on the FPS there. But anyway, let's go to hole 10 here, and I'm going to show you how to export some of these splines. I picked hole 10 just because it has water going between the hole, and it's a little more complicated than the average hole, and so hopefully I'll do some things. Maybe I'll even make some mistakes, hopefully, just to show you how I work through some things. I've already done hole 10, and I've just done all the holes here, but so I'm going to just show you what I would do, and I'm not going to resave things, but you'll get the idea, and then we'll bring it all into Blender and put it together. The first thing you're going to want to do is hide your outer terrain if you have one, and hide your regular terrain. So I pick my outer terrain, go to the cogwheel, and untick this draw. I really should turn off those notifications. I don't know how to do it at this point. Let me pause. Okay, sorry about that. So you click on your outer terrain, untick this draw button to hide your outer terrain. I'm also going to do it for the main terrain. But before doing that, you're going to want to turn your debug on. And so I think if you watch the others, you know how to do this. And you come down to this course script and turn debug on. And then I'm going to hide this main terrain the same way. Go to the cogwheel and untick that draw setting. And then I'm going to remove this word terrain up here. I'm also going to want to hide your water. The reason I'm hiding all these things, the terrain and the water, is so that when I'm selecting these meshes, I'm not accidentally picking the water up or accidentally picking the outer terrain up. So go ahead and select, you know, the rough mesh, and then we're going to export it. We're using that spline OBJ exporter, and we're going to tick only selected objects, untick generate materials, textures, and objects there, and then export. Now you'll see within my project here in the assets folder, I've got something called splines, a folder called splines, and then I've saved a folder for each hole just so I don't get confused. And hole 10, so I also always call them underscore OBJ. So this is the first rough, so 10 first rough underscore OBJ, save it, it would overwrite this. The reason I do the underscore OBJ is so that when it shows up here in my hierarchy, in my project, then I don't get confused between which one's the FBX and which one's the OBJ. And we'll use the FBX files as exports from Blender. So then we're going to do the same for the second rough. And I'm just going to simulate it here. Stop talking for a minute. Keeps going back to here. I'm going to save this one because then it'll at least it'll always take you back to the same folder you just saved to. So had I done that previously. So that's my 10-second rough OBJ, save that. And then I'm going to do the same. We're going to export the semi-rough. I'm going to do those together. So I'll hold down shift and left click. So then I'm not going to have a 1 and a 2. I'm just going to have the 1. And the only reason I've done the rough separately, and you'll see I'll actually merge them later. The only reason I did them separately is because I don't yet know the triangle count. And so I would save this. I guess I'll just do it. And so sometimes if I bring this one mesh in, if it's going to exceed the 65,000, then I'm going to keep them separate. But I may bring them in together if it's not going to exceed that. So we'll do the same for the fairway. Okay. Now the only other thing, which I'm not going to export this, so you have to wait because this takes a little longer, I think. But the main outer one, so you're going to want to export that, and that's just your main outer spline. But now before we go to Blender, there's one last trick, and this is the key to the unwrapping here and to making your life easy. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a plane the exact dimensions of our course. So let's go back and find our terrain. And this will all make sense once we go to Blender, but I've got a trick here. And our terrain is 1500 by 1500. So we're going to make a square. So we're going to make a game object, 3D object in a plane. And we're going to make this the exact dimensions of our course. And so this plane is actually 10 by 10. And so my course was 1500. So we're going to scale this 150 times. And so that's in the X and the Z. So hopefully that made sense. But 10 times this would be 1500 meters. So it's 10 meter by 10 meter plane, and I'm scaling 150 times to make a 1500 by 1500 meter plane. If you're 2,000 meters for your plot, 2,000 meter by 2,000 meters, you're going to be 200 by 200. If you're 1,266 by 1,266, then it's going to be, 126.6 in the X and the Z there. Okay, so now you'll see it doesn't line up with the other one, and that's because it's at a weird position. So I'm going to move it to 0, 0, 0. And then we're going to move it correctly into position. Now, what you're going to do for that, it's half of your course dimension. And, so if it's 1,500 meters in width, then you're going to move this position just 750 meters. And then in the Z, you're also going to move it 750 meters. So same thing if it was, 1260 was your... by 1260 was your dimensions, then you're going to be 630 in the X and 630 in the Z. But basically, now if I bring my terrain back and you see my terrain, they're going to line up just right. Now, they're not going to have the same height map data to them, but you're going to see that they line up perfectly there. And now we're going to export that plane. So I'm going to pick this plane. And then I'm going to do the OBJ exporter, just as we do with the others. And I've saved that here as course plane OBJ. Okay, so you'll save that. Now we're going to head into Blender. So for this, I'm actually using Blender 2.8. And hopefully you'll get that. You have to get 2.8 or newer for Quadremesher to show up and work. So with the new setup, it's a little different if you're used to the old 2.7.9 UI interface. It's a little tougher to get used to, honestly, since I'm so used to the old one, but we'll walk you through it. So let's import our splines. And that's Oakmont. Well, let's just go find it here. Okay. So unfortunately, you can't shift select these. You got to bring them in one at a time. So I'm just going to bring them in top to bottom. But I'm going to just bring them all in. And then we're going to bring in that course plane as well. Now, when I was doing this for the entire course, I actually do one hole at a time, but keep bringing them all in and have all these layers here, and it works out okay. So on the view on this, you zoom out, you'll see it disappears. We got to fix our where it clips here, but basically on the end of your clip, change this to 4,000. That should cover most people's terrain, but you could make it bigger if you need to. So you'll see my hole is there, and that's my plane. And so we'll get to work on this. We picked the rough first. And so I'm going to just left click, pick that tab in. And to do this, I'm always in the UV editing mode as well. So it's on layout view. I'm going to change this to UV editing. Now, one of the moves that we use a lot of is the decimal place on the numpad. And that just zooms us in to the selected object. So you'll see I use that a lot. I'm going to shrink this down. Now when I tab in here to the rough, when I'm looking down here at the bottom, you see our tries are only about 10,000. So I'm going to be able to do the rough jointly with the other one because when I quadremesh this, you'll see I don't think it's going to be too big, but we can always come back and redo it. But if I pick them both and tab in, you'll see that they're only 13,000. So I'm going to them both pick, so my first and my second rough, and I'm going to Control J, join them, okay? And I don't care what they're named. You'll see that doesn't really matter to Unity, and so I can stay organized without stressing too much. You know, you got to pick your battles here. But now we need to quadremesh this. Remember, I don't have a blend on this, so the method for this is going to be a little different than the semi-ref. What I roughly found for this Quadremesher, so it's hidden, it's under this little arrow here, and then this tab Quadremesh. You'll have to go online and search for Quadremesher. It's there's free trial. I think I'm paying now $10 for 3 months or something like that. But get the Quadremesher for Blender. And so on the Quadremesher, when I'm remeshing the rough, in order to be consistent so that we can be consistent throughout the whole course, I had to basically decide on settings. And so what I'm doing is I look at the tries of the rough, which is 13,000, basically 13,011, and I multiply that by 1.5. Okay, so we'll get our calculator up here. And what did I say, 1311 times 1.5. And you don't have to do it exactly. You can just write 13,000 or whatever, but 19,516. And then what I'm doing is on this Quadremesher, you'll want to probably play with it. But one of the things I'm leaving on is this adapt quad count. If you have a hillier course, that's going to be important because it's going to kind of adapt over the highly curved areas. You could even pull this adaptive size up so that it will do put more you know, it will actually make smaller quads in those areas, but which means it'll put more grass in those areas as well. So anyway, I was leaving mine at around 50%, but make sure the checkbox is ticked there. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to make a mistake on purpose here. So I'm going to change my quad count to, what do we say, 19,516 here. And hit enter. And then I'm going to leave this detect hard edges by angle checked. And then we're going to go remesh it. And you're going to see a mistake that happens here, and then we'll go back and fix it. Okay, so see what happens here. Around my bunker, it looks like crap. And what we have to do is actually paint around the bunkers to tell it to put a few more quads. So I'm going to Control Z out of this. If you make a mistake, just Control Z back. You'll see when it remeshes, it makes a new mesh, but still keeps the old mesh. So you can always go back if you need to. So now we're going to have to go into vertex paint mode. So follow me here, vertex paint. And you can come to this quad density paint selector. And say I choose 4, which is the max setting. It's going to have us paint in red. So I'm going to click this view so you can see that and check tool settings. I don't know why that doesn't come in default, but that's here, view tool settings. And we're in vertex paint mode on this rough mesh. Now, 4 is the highest amount of density it's going to put. So if I paint this real dark red, it's going to put a lot of triangles in there. It may be too much, so you're going to have to experiment with this depending on your course. So I'm going to Control Z that. I'm going to put my quad density paint at 2 here, see what happens. So if you zoom out, it makes your brush a little larger. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just paint around my bunker. And it's going to tell the program, the Quadremesher, to put a few more vertices around the bunker. And you don't have to touch all the areas, but I usually will at least touch these peninsulas because you need a higher quad count for it to pick up those edges. Now, the neat thing is in Oakmont, I'm not having to do this because I actually have a higher density spline that goes around every bunker. And it's actually kind of awesome because then when I come in here, I don't have to do this silly paint part. So there may be some advantage to putting that around here. So now we're going to redo this and see if it still makes a mistake and if we need to come back and maybe paint it darker. So now you got to make sure you check this box, use vertex color. It will default and remove that every time you do this. So you got to make sure that you know that you've got the correct boxes. So I still want adapt quad count, use the vertex, and detect hard edges. We're going to remesh it. Okay, cool. So you can see it did much better, but it still kind of failed right in here. I can go back and look at my old rough mesh to see, okay, am I going to accept that or not? I don't like that, so I'm going to Control Z back into the painting part, and I'm actually going to just do my max quad paint on this. Let's not mess around. Sometimes around T boxes you'll have to do this as well. Because for whatever reason around the hills, it will struggle a little bit. And sometimes I actually go back into Unity and reshape some of those hills to get it to come in here and look nicer. But so let's remesh that. Oh, I didn't tick use vertex color. So I'll Control Z back here, and then there we go. And then we can just redo it. All right. I promise you this is not terrible once you've done it a few times. It's not as easy trying to sit here and talk, but now you can see what I'm saying where it's adding some triangles. It's still struggling in here, so I'm going to Control Z back and add a little more. Sometimes it's a little better. It's interesting how it's screwing that area up. There must be a hill there. Let's see if we can get it better. I'm going to actually delete some of that. So if I make this 0, I don't want to do that. I want to make it 1. Let's back off in that area and see if it can do better. Yeah, it did a little better. So, you know, it didn't like adding too many quads there. So you'll see that looks good. And then I also always look at my T boxes to make sure that nothing funny happened there as well. So that looks good. Okay. So that's remeshed. So now we can, let's finish up with the rough here. So I'm going to hit 5 to go into user orthographic mode there, and then 7 to be directly above. And this is going to be the unwrapping part. And so just follow me on these steps. I tab out, and then I'm going to select, I got to get out of vertex mode. Go into object mode. I'm going to first select the outer course plane, and then I'm going to select the rough. So I'm going to shift and left mouse click that. And then I'm going to Control J, join them. And then I'm going to tab in and make sure both meshes are selected. I know they are, but you can double A to unselect, A to select them all. U and project from view bounds. Okay. So now what I've done is I've unwrapped this perfectly to the dimensions of the terrain. So this will line up with your satellite overlay. Now you may want to bring your overlay in here because of the way Unity exports things with the terrains in these objects. For me, my satellite overlay is flipped 180 degrees. So you may have to do what I'm doing here, which is select the whole thing on the left here, which I did with A, with my mouse over here on the left, and then I hit R180 and then hit enter, and then come back over here, and then we're going to unjoin these because I don't want to bring the plane in, I just want the rough. And so you're going to unjoin these by P and then choose by material. So we luck out. When we bring these in, it automatically assigns a material, but it will put an extension on the CourseForge materials like .001 or .002 so that they won't be the same. And so we can cheat here a little and we can separate them now by materials. So now we have our rough back by itself. And like I said, I don't care about naming here. I'm just going to export it. So I'm going to go File, Export, FBX. And then we're going to go to our splines, hold 10. And I'm going to export this as 10 underscore rough FBX. Tick here on the left, selected objects, experimental, apply, transform, and choose to export. Then I'm going to test each one as we go. So then I come back into Unity while it's exporting. And then I'm going to go find that rough FBX and drag it into the scene. Now I've already got it in there, so let me go delete my I'm gonna delete the rough and semi-rough. I don't know that I'm gonna show you the fairway. It's just you guys can probably extrapolate how to do it. So let's put the rough in. And then you're just going to come up to its position and put it 0, 0, 0, and that's going to be exactly where you want it to be. And then I'm going to come over here and zoom in on it. Just hit an F here and then zoom in. And then I'm going to put my rough texture now on that, or my rough. So you're just going to drag your rough material onto it there. And then the other thing you're going to want to do is I'm going to Control Z that. I'm actually on the wrong spline there. So now I'm on the 10 rough FBX. You're also going to want to turn cast shadows off. So cast shadows off. And then I'm going to drag this rough. And so now you're going to see there that our grass is correctly shaded by the overlay. Now, obviously, the rough also has its material settings, so I'm going to show you that here while we're here, and hopefully this will be legible or readable. I wonder if I can slide this off by itself. So I'm using one texture mode, value-based density, default PBR. Here are the boxes that I've got checked. Here are my settings. If you can't see that, 7, 6. My grass end is at 35. And then in this box here, I'm just putting my overlay. And then we'll get to one important thing here, which is my grass. My grass is actually just coming from this grass file that's provided here. So if you type in grass, he actually provides this file, this original grass file, and I take that into Photoshop and edit it. So we'll go look at what I've done there. The reason I don't use his, and I'll show you here, we can zoom in on using his. Let me select my grass. One other thing we didn't do is I have to set it at minus 0.15. Remember, I've changed it in the shader settings to grow the grass at plus 0.15 so that we don't have dynamic sky issues. And then I'm burying the grass or lowering the grass minus 0.15. You got to watch the previous videos to know what I mean on that. But so the reason I don't use his default grass coloring there, it's so annoying the way it selects that. I'll put this back to the way I had it. Is my grass is basically just lighter. That's why I've done it this way, and it's not as dark at the base. And so you can see it's kind of a fake shadowing effect, but in the end it allows my grass blades to be a little brighter, and I like that. Just because as you get lower, the grass highlights a little bit more, and it gives it just a touch more appearance when you're in game. And so let me just go into Photoshop and show you how we did that. But this was his default grass, and what you're going to want to do is select that, and you can just do select load selection and choose OK, and then you would create a new layer, and then just use a gradient. So it's the paint bucket, the gradient tool, and you're going to want it to be black and white. Let me see, I may reverse that. Yeah, I'm going to flip that. And then I want it to be more white, you know, so in the end, you can start here. It's going to be bright white up here, left click, shift, drag down, and then it's just a little grayish at the bottom. You know, and if you save that, you'll see then when you come into Unity, it's going to change your grass a little bit. So you'll have to adjust that to your liking, but I hope that makes sense. You know, if you said, that's too bright, go back to Photoshop and then come down lower, or sorry, start up higher, and then your white, you know, you're just going to have to experiment there. And now it's going to be a little darker, you know, so that's not bad. Okay, so that's the rough. Now let's just go do another layer. And the semi-rough and the fairway are a lot easier because you don't have to do all the futzing with the painting with those. So this is the fairway. Tab in here. Now the fairway, or let's do the semi-rough because I don't know that everybody's going to want to do the fairway, to be honest. It may not be necessary. So let's grab the semi-rough here. And the way the semi-rough is done is you first have to clean up the mesh because the points here are not joined. So if you go to vertex select and I move this because of the blend, you see the points aren't joined here. So we have to join our points, which is just basically removing our doubles. And so in the new way to do this, you go mesh, clean up, merge by distance. I change my merge by distance to 0.001, hit enter. So you see here removed 540 vertices. Now we're going to quadremesh it. In this case, for the semi-rough, what I was doing is just a 1-to-1. And so this is 7,974 tries. That's what I'm going to type in. I don't need to use vertex color, so I'm going to untick that. You can leave adapt quad count on, but then just go ahead and remesh it. And you'll see, so some areas it will screw up, you know, so it didn't do well here. And we'll go see if there's anywhere else that it struggled or made a mistake. They show up as blue, so it struggled in here. That looks okay. So you could, I'm going to take this adapt, I'm going to control Z, and I'm going to take this adapt quad count off and see what happens there. Take off detect hard edges by angle as well. Okay, much happier. So some of it's experimenting. If you get some weird results that you don't like, sort of taking some things off. You could have also maybe vertex painted those areas. But all right, we're already done with that. Well, almost. We have to unwrap it. So to unwrap it, you're going to select this outer box again. And then you're going to shift left click on the semi-rough. So outer box, shift left click on the outer rough. Control J, join, tab. Select them both. U, project from view bounds, come on the left. A to select all, R 180. And now I'm good. Come back over here on the right and P, and then choose by material, and now it's separated. Tab yourself back into object mode here, and then I'm selecting the semi-rough, and we're exporting to FBX. And so you can see once you get in a rhythm, it's not as bad. And then I'm going to have to find my splines here. So that's my semi-rough FBX. And then you're going to put it at 0, minus 0.15, 0. And that didn't look like it showed up, did it? Where is it? I may have done a bad export. Where is it? Oh, it's at minus 0.15, so that's why you can't see it. If I put it at 0, sorry. You should probably do that. Put it at 0 so you know that it's there. And then I'm going to put it at minus 0.15, turn the cast shadows to off, and then I'm going to bring my semi-rough grass onto it. And then I'll show you the settings for that as well. So you can see the semi-rough there. So semi-rough settings. Same thing, one texture, grass type, value-based density, default PBR. I've got this following surface normals. It just sticks the grass up a little straighter. And then same thing, it's satellite overlay, and I think, yeah, I'm using the same grass. You might, I mean, depending on how you want this lit, you may want this to show up brighter, so you might make a different, you could make a different texture to put in here for that. Also notice my blades are a lot smaller than some of the previous tutorials. You know, look at my rough blades at 0.0029. My semi-rough blades at 0.0025. So then let's go export the fairway. Remember, the semi-rough I'm doing at the 1:1. The fairway, I need higher density for smaller pieces of grass. So the first thing you're going to do, since we have a blend here, is get rid of the, we're going to clean up merge by distance, 0.001. It removed 350 vertices. I'm going to do this at 4 times the value of the tries. So 6130. And so I'm going to multiply that by 4. And we're going to put that into the Quadremesher at 24,520. And we don't need to tick any boxes on this, just like the semi-rough. And it will usually get you your best result. The only thing it struggles sometimes around the green, you'll see. So if you lose something in these thinner areas, just do the vertex paint on it and click the use vertex color and it will fix that. But sometimes you'll get a little part chopped out. The other thing is sometimes it'll chop a part out, and the other thing you could do is bridge edge loops. So let's imagine, we'll do it real quick here. Let's imagine it came in like this. If it did something like this and you lost it, you can bridge this from here to there. Where if you pick this and then you pick this here, I think you can bridge edge loops here. So go to edge, bridge edge loops, and it will bring those together. And it'll be a close enough approximation that it'll work fine. It may not follow the terrain exactly, but it'll be good enough. All right, so 5 to get to orthographic, 7 to above, and then we're going to go select the outer. So I'm in object mode, left clicking, select the outer, select the fairway, shift and left click to do that. We're going to control J to join them, tab into edit mode, A to select them all, U project from view bounds, come to the left, select with A, R 180, come back to the right, P by material, and now you're already unwrapped. Then select the fairway, and then we're going to export it. Come back into Unity, and then we're going to, I didn't delete the other one, so I'm going to just delete it. And then drag it in just to show you, and then this will be it. So find that spline, 10 fairway FBX. Same thing, we're going to 0, 0, 0 so I can see it. Cast shadows off. I know it's in the right spot, minus 0.15 to lower it. And then I'm going to drag my fairway material onto it. And then you'd be done with that hole and you'd move on. And I promise you, once you get the rhythm, you're 5 minutes a hole. But let's show you the fairway settings as well. On this, I've got a shorter fade end. I really just don't have it rendering the grass very far. Now, I will show you real quick while you're here. And same thing, there's the overlay. And I did make a lighter because the grass, it just wouldn't show up. And so let's make this stand up a little taller. So I'm going to adjust my disorder to so you can see it better. Let's, I don't know if we can make it, let's make it even a little wider. Just so it can show up. I know you're going to have a hard time seeing this, especially if it's on YouTube. So try to brighten it up just so you can see. But if you can see here, and I lowered my resolution as well down to 1080, but you can see the grass is showing up. Now watch this. Just what I want to show you is I'm going to bring my main camera down here, so I can show you it with and without. So here's it with the fairway grass, and then here's it without. Why do I like it? You can see all this grass. There's some uniformity to it. You can see the normals and things that are happening with the normals. And so when you have it in place, it just adds a little bit of confusion and a little more randomness to it. So I like it that it kind of covers up. When we get real close in game, some of these textures can look a little funny, especially you know, if they're blurred or they're too crisp. And so just by adding this, it just adds just the right amount of confusion to it, so that to me it looks better from a distance, especially if you're on a projector. And so that's kind of why I'm still using the fairway. But if you want a better running from an FPS standpoint, you may just want to get rid of the fairway and not use it. But I kind of like what it does for my course. So anyway, hopefully that helps. I know it's a long one, but I'm sure most of you guys can work through it.